Well, hello everyone. Welcome to our webinar. My name is Alistair Roth. I'm the Executive Director at AIIA in Victoria. Thank you very much for your interest, and a warm welcome to the members of the Diplomatic and Consular Corps who are also dialing in. Before we start, I'll just say a few brief words on the running order. We'll take questions in the second half. I'm sure you're all getting very familiar with Zoom by now, but you can type questions in the Q&A tab in the little toolbar at the bottom of your screen, and you can vote on questions posed by other people. So to today's webinar, and to discuss Norway's UN Security Council role and their aims and aspirations when they take up their seat in January, we're joined from Canberra by His Excellency Mr. Paul Larsen. Paul is a career diplomat with the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He's been ambassador since September 2018 to Australia, New Zealand, and I think 10 Pacific nations. Before that, he served in Belgrade, in New York with the UN, and in Moscow. He's also been diplomatic advisor to the Office of the Prime Minister in Norway, and he served as Chief of Staff in Rome to the UN World Food Programme for 6 years. Paul, I note also that I guess shortly before coming to Australia, you were Special Envoy for Security Council Affairs. Congratulations on a successful campaign. Thank you very much for your time and joining us today, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Alistair, for your kind introduction and your invite to speak to the Institute. I'm very pleased to do so, and of course, I'm also very pleased that we managed to be elected to the Security Council, because the competition was very tough. I have been involved in this campaign now for many years before I came to Canberra as ambassador. I was the campaign manager when Canada joined the race with Norway and Ireland for the 2 seats 4 years ago. So I came to Canberra and Wellington and other capitals to learn how to run a successful campaign, and got a lot of good tips. And I want to thank our Australian, New Zealand, and also Pacific Island partners for helping us get the necessary 2/3 majority in the General Assembly vote on the 18th of June. We got 130 votes, 3 more than we needed to be elected in the first round. And as you may know, Ireland got the second seat. They got exactly 128 votes. So Canada drew the shortest straw this time, and this just shows how competitive it is for the Western group countries to be elected to the Security Council. It's always a strong competition. That's not really the case for the other regional groups anymore. Africa, Asia, Latin America mostly agree on a clean slate for their candidates. The Eastern group has competition, and Estonia is sitting now. But you can ask, why is that? And we have been faced with questions in Norway also. Why on earth does Norway want to sit on the Security Council? Why is it so important? We will be squeezed between the superpowers. We will have no influence anyway, because the permanent 5 members are dominating the show. These are the kind of questions we had to answer. And I would just like to start by giving our 3 responses to that. And those 3 responses first has to do with assuming responsibility. The second is to achieve results. And the third one has to do with gaining respect. Now, as for the first one, we believe that Norway has, and other countries, has a responsibility as founding members of the United Nations 75 years ago, and as a good global citizen, to take on the task of serving as a non-permanent member of the Security Council from time to time. After all, the Security Council is the most important body at the center of the United Nations system of rules-based order and international law. It's the only body that can take decisions on peace and security which are binding, legally binding, on all member states, whether it's peaceful resolution of conflicts or peacekeeping operations, sanctions, or even military enforcement actions. So there is no more important body in the world when it comes to peace and security. Now, it's true that sitting on the council does sometimes represent difficult dilemmas. And I was myself part of the United Nations mission of Norway back 20 years ago when we were last member of the Security Council, also elected together with Ireland, by the way, in those days. We had to chair the Iraq Sanctions Committee in those days, and Iraq was a very controversial and sensitive topic. As you recall, this was the time just before the war in 2003. We ended our term in 2002. We had to chair the Council Sanctions Committee on Iraq about the weapons inspectors. And yes, indeed, there were a lot of pressure from all sides, and including from the permanent members. But the response to that is also that you cannot avoid the pressure. When superpowers disagree, whether you sit on the council or not, you are forced to take positions and to balance and to find solutions. And at least when you are on the council, you have a possibility to influence the outcome of the deliberations. And that brings me to my second point, why we want to sit on the council. We actually really believe and want to achieve results in promoting peace and conflict resolution. That's a key motivation for why we are running and aiming for a membership. And we have seen that the elected 10 members do have influence, even if it is true that the permanent 5, of course, often dominate because they have the veto. They have very strong and sustained diplomatic presence in New York. The capacity is strong. But last time, when we were members in 2001, 2002, we did, for example, take the lead on Ethiopia, Eritrea to establish a UN monitoring mission on the border between those two countries. We managed to build bridges and consensus on Balkan issues following the breakup of the former Yugoslavia, where the United States and Russia were often in disagreement, but we managed to find the common ground. Sweden did a great job as a council member a few years ago on Syria and humanitarian access. New Zealand, just before that, brought to the council the issues of Pacific island security concerns. And Australia, before that, brought protection of civilians to the prominence among the thematic issues in the Security Council. So I think by being a pragmatic problem solver, a bridge builder, countries like Norway and Australia can use knowledge, facts, fact-based footwork, and good diplomacy to build consensus around council decisions and do have an influence on issues which are of great importance to us. And that brings me to the third point, and the third reason why it's important to sit on the council, that it's about reinforcing respect, both for the United Nations, the council itself, and the UN system in general, and international law, and of course for your own country. By being a member, an active member, a serious member of the council, you build credibility and you strengthen your sovereignty, because you show that you are serious, you are not so big. There are big nations, there are not so big nations. We are among the not so big ones, but we still can play a role as a significant partner if you have done your homework and managed to do the footwork. And that brings me to your question, Alistair, about what we are envisaging that we'll be focusing on as member of the council for the next 2 years. Now, overall, our policy will be to promote the rules-based order, protect the UN system of international law, which is so fundamental for our common security and prosperity, and where the Security Council, law of the sea, human rights conventions are really the pillars of the system. There is This is more important than ever now that the multilateral system is under pressure from many quarters. Then we know from previous experience that most of the Council work goes to manage the ongoing geographical conflicts on the Council's agenda and the peacekeeping operations associated with them. More or less 3/4 of the Council issues today are African issues. Congo, Sahel, Horn of Africa, Somalia, but also Middle East, very prominent, Syria, Yemen, Libya, and of course Afghanistan as well. And there we believe and know that we can bring to the table our experience as a peace mediator from the time of the Oslo Accords between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and until the Colombian peace process, which we facilitated together with Cuba and led to the Nobel Peace Prize for Colombia 4 years ago. Norway has gained credibility as an impartial broker and experience with back channels. And this is something we will bring into the work of the Council and hopefully lead to results. Next, we will have to chair at least one sanctions committee, if not more. Last time, as I said, we chaired the Iraq Sanctions Committee. Australia, when you were members in 2013-14, you chaired the AIIA Sanctions Committee, which is now expanded to include also Daesh or ISIS in the Middle East. Hard work, very demanding, diplomatically and resource-wise, especially when the permanent 5 are split. But I do recall very well, because in 2001, when we were members of the Council, the September 11 attacks on New York happened, and the Council really came together very well on counterterrorism issues, both on the Al-Qaeda sanctions, but also setting up a new counterterrorist committee. And that is an area which has grown in importance in the Security Council in the last few years, and where the permanent 5 members usually have quite a cohesive position. And there again, we bring to the table experience from 70 years of peacekeeping operations, and also recently counter-terrorist work in Afghanistan, Iraq, etc., but also previously in Lebanon, in the UN force in Mali. Currently, we are stationed in Mali with the troops. 40,000 Norwegians, in fact, have served under UN flag and helmets, blue helmets, for the past 70 years, since the first operation was set up in Kashmir in 1949, which is still ongoing, by the way. Then we will pursue 3 thematic issues in the Security Council. The first one is the so-called Women, Peace and Security Agenda, based on Resolution 1325, which celebrates 20 years in October, and has to do with including women as participants and women's rights, and of course their protection, in all Security Council resolutions and peacekeeping operation mandates. There we see that there has been a broad degree of consensus, not much controversy over the past 20 years, but there are pressures now, and it's important to maintain the consensus and cohesion of the Security Council on this important agenda to prevent backsliding on results achieved. And the United Kingdom is chairing and has the pen on these issues in the Council, so we'll work very closely together with them to focus on operational, maybe more than normative issues and opportunities in order to integrate women, peace and security into Council work and decisions. And that includes an area which has become more important in recent years, sexual violence in conflict. Very important humanitarian focus, and important to keep that humanitarian focus and not to politicize these issues. The second area will be a follow-on to Australia's priority during one of your priorities during your membership: protection of civilians in conflicts, including children in armed conflict. This is a very important issue which has been around since more or less the genocide in Rwanda, when I was on my first posting myself, mid-90s, in the UN mission in New York, and until today, with Syria and Yemen as examples of the need to protect civilians better. And again, the United Kingdom and Belgium, they are the chairs of the working groups that are set up as subsidiary bodies in the Security Council to deal or to lead these issues. And there we foresee that we can use informal consultations and formats, such as the so-called AIIA formula, as well as open formal meetings to bring in also civil society organizations like Save the Children and the International Committee of the Red Cross to inform the Council and come with important inputs. Again, I believe that Norway can bring to the table quite considerable humanitarian and human rights engagement, including on the issue of education in conflicts, the so-called Safe Schools initiative. Again, we will seek to build bridges between the P5 because there are concerns among the permanent members about sovereignty, about humanitarian intervention. It's important to overcome such concerns. And we saw just last week that finally the Council managed to reach agreement on humanitarian access into Syria. A resolution was adopted on this issue last week. The third issue that we will focus on is climate change as a security threat. Now, this is also linked to oceans and sustainable development. Sustainable development, security increasingly go hand in hand. And of course, these are important issues for the Pacific Island states that are threatened with sea level rises and climate change. I took part in the last two Pacific Island Forum summits with our foreign minister in Tuvalu last year, and the Nauru summit the year before, where the Bowie Declaration was adopted, which has the security concerns of Pacific states and the climate change as at the center of these concerns. Now, so we will try to find out how to prevent and resolve conflicts linked to climate change. It's not easy. There are also different views among the permanent five on this issue, but everyone agree, we believe, that migration, displacement, resource conflicts, rising sea levels are concerns for everyone. And we will work to bring the P5 and other members on board, as has Germany been doing during their term now, and Sweden before them, New Zealand before them again. We had several thematic debates over the last few years on climate and security. And the importance is to recognize the risks in concrete circumstances, not in a general abstract way, but go straight to the conflicts and help the Secretariat also of the UN to analyze and present this in a way which convinces everyone that climate change is indeed a security threat. The first resolution which actually recognized this was under Sweden's presidency and penholdership in 2017 on the Lake Chad in Central Africa. There, the climate change was recognized by the Council as a security threat. And again, I believe we bring to the table a large envelope and decades of experience with development assistance, including funds for, of course, health security vaccines, but also for climate adaptation and sustainable oceans, where we work very well together with Prime Minister Morrison and the Prime Minister of Fiji and other Pacific states to both to combat plastic pollution, which is a sustainable development issue, but also illegal fishing and other issues related to crime. I think we have the credibility as a committed and constructive partner to continue to bring climate and security onto the agenda of the Council. And finally, we will work to increase transparency and accountability of the working methods of the Security Council. This includes to show openness towards the larger membership, to brief informally and formally countries that are especially involved in conflicts, obviously, and to consult them in advance of council discussions. That also goes for troop contributing countries. They deserve to be heard. And also to brief the larger membership following meetings of the council, and try to ensure that every council meeting has a concrete output, a written statement, presidential press statement or other sorts, so that the larger membership is aware what's going on in the council. Now, the UN has always been a cornerstone of Norway's foreign policy ever since 1945, when the UN was formed in San Francisco. And the first Secretary General was from Norway. His name was Trygve Lie. And when the UN headquarters opened in New York in 1952, the Security Council chamber that you saw on the initial slide from the Institute for this seminar was designed. The chamber was designed and decorated and donated by Norway, with a Norwegian architect and Norwegian artist responsible for the large mural painting that you see behind the horseshoe table, and the wallpaper and chairs. So since I was there last time, serving in 2001, 2002, there was a big renovation of the whole headquarters, including the council chamber, but we used the same materials, the same family firms and designers, and renovated exactly as it was in the beginning. And then in that context, we made some buttons from the old wallpaper. You can see it here. They still smell a bit of smoke from the cigarettes, which used to be smoked by Sergei Lavrov and other prominent ambassadors until the early 2000s, when that practice stopped. But it's great to have a piece of history with us, and next time I see you, I'll give you one of those. So that was my introduction. I hope I'll get some questions, and I'm very ready to answer anything that you might want to talk about.
Absolutely. Well, Paul, thank you very much. It's nice to have that little touch of history just at the end there, and you know, sort of welcome home, I suppose, to Norway, to its chamber. Yes, we got some questions starting to come in, but I just wanted to lead off with one on a general note. It seems a huge agenda to get through in what's a fairly short space of time. I mean, only 2 years. How do you prioritize what you're trying to do? How do you start trying to get this introduced into what must already be a busy Security Council schedule? And is there, I mean, you talked about a follow-on from what Australia was working on with the protection of civilians. Is there a sort of handover from one non-permanent group to the next?
These are very good questions, Alistair. I think it's easier in a way because all these things are already on the Council's, let's say, radar. We will continue the work of other Western countries that are expected by their citizens and public to pursue these issues, even though sometimes some of the permanent members believe that there is a little bit too much fluff around these thematic issues. And it's true that most of the time, as I said, will be devoted to dealing with the crises as they arise, and there's plenty of them, as you know. But I think what we and others have been doing, and what we will do, is to just keep all, well, there are other issues too, but we have identified these three among several that we will always keep on the radar and be an advocate to include language into resolutions and mandates of peacekeeping missions, so that nobody tries to delete previous text. There is a lot of work that has been done, and a lot of ground that has been gained over the past few years on all these three issues. Some of them are not very controversial. As I said, women, peace and security is very well established. protection of civilians also, but you know, that one has to be sensitive that some of the members might not be as forward-leaning as we are, and some of us. So we have to find common ground and compromise. And the same goes for climate change, which is maybe the most challenging in many ways. But there is that resolution I mentioned on Lake Chad and several open meetings where all council members have actually recognized the threat. How you link that to the issue of mitigation and emissions is a different story. But adaptation and disaster reduction and resilience and the conflicts over water and food especially, but also rising sea levels and disaster cyclones, all these things are, I think, broadly recognized to be security concerns.
Excellent. I'll try not to jump around too much with the questions, sort of keep a theme going if we can. But there's a question from actually the president of our organisation in Tasmania, who have obviously a very close working relationship with the Australian Antarctic Division. Will Norway's focus on climate change include protection of the polar regions?
Well, we have a long and strong history of collaboration with Australia on Antarctic issues. I think there is no other two countries with less daylight between our positions than Norway and Australia. We even share thousands of kilometers of border on the Antarctic continent. And we are as concerned as Australia and other treaty partners that the Antarctica continues to be a peaceful area of cooperation and non-confrontation. So I think we haven't seen that polar issues has been brought up in the council, and we believe that we are handling this very well within the Antarctic Treaty already. So I hope there's no reason to bring in issues or conflicts in that context. But we, of course, like Australia and other treaty partners, France, Britain, etc., keep a close eye on keeping it that way.
Just following on sustainability and protection of the environment, to what extent Norway has been renowned for developing a sovereign wealth fund and taking a long-term view. Do you think that's going to help direct leading the world to look at a more sustainable future through this run?
Well, the sovereign wealth fund is one thing. It's been a blessing, let's say, that we have set aside funds for the future and our pensions, but it's totally separate from foreign policy. We are not getting involved in the management of the fund and vice versa. But as for the long-term perspective, yes, indeed, we do have a long-term perspective. As I said, since the beginning of the United Nations, Norway and Australia and several others have been great supporters of the rules-based order. And I really think that alongside the Security Council, maybe the most important thing that the United Nations has done, in addition to human rights conventions, is the law of the sea. And the regimes around that, which was created during the 70s and has been respected by everyone ever since. And that's one of the things we really want to maintain, because without the security of the exclusive economic zones and the clear demarcations that we have on continental shelves, etc., many of us would feel that investments in offshore oil production or fishing would be at risk. So we are very committed to continue as a general policy to support the rules-based order and the international legal system that the United Nations has created over the years. There is no alternative. I mean, the UN would have to be invented if it wasn't there already.
Obviously, the UN's, I mean, it's been under pressure from funding with some countries neglecting their responsibilities or others not coming forward with the funding. Do you have any plans within this role to try and increase funds available to the UN? Any pressure you can put on delinquent countries?
We always have been, I mean, there's always been an issue, or many years, at least as long as I've been involved for 25 years, it's been back and forth to secure funding. The one thing is the compulsory funding that all countries are obliged to provide, and there we will always encourage and talk to everyone to make sure that they not only pay their bills, but also as early as possible in the year, which we do. We try to pay in January so that the UN has funds to operate throughout the year. Then there are the voluntary funding, which of course is voluntary for the funds and programs like the World Food Programme, where I was privileged to be Chief of Staff and Director for 6 years in Rome. And that is wholly voluntary funded. And the biggest donors were the United States, Canada, European Union, Australia, Norway, others, kept the backbone, basically, of the humanitarian system, which is WFP, running smoothly all through the food crisis and beyond. And that still happens. And the voluntary funding is crucial for the UNICEF, for UNDP, and also for the big specialized agencies, of course, like World Health Organization and the Food and Agriculture Organization that also operate projects on voluntary funding in addition to the compulsory funding that all states have to provide. So we encourage everyone and try to be a good example for everyone by going ahead and funding as much as possible. Now our total envelope, I think we are number 5 or something in many of the funds and programs. The 7th biggest donor altogether to the UN system is Norway, in fact. And our envelope is about 6 billion Australian dollars now, 1 billion to humanitarian operations. So we encourage everyone to follow suit and to follow the UN target of, since the 70s, where the UN set the target that every donor should give 0.7% of GDP to development. There are very few countries that do that now. Norway and Sweden are among a handful.
One of the questions which is moving up to the top of the list that people are interested in, which is, I guess, touches a little bit on geopolitics, but with the Israel-Palestine situation and the recent proposal from Israel that it might annex part of the West Bank, what is Norway's position on that situation?
We have always, since the Oslo agreements, been in favor of a two-state solution agreed by both parties. And we are working towards that aim. It's been difficult in the past few years, but we are still able to mobilize donors as we are chair of the ad hoc liaison committee, so-called AHLC, for donations and funding for the Palestinian Authority. And we continue to provide, it's one of the top recipients of our assistance is the Palestinian Authority. And we believe that is crucial to keep humanitarian and other functions and public service functions going in the Palestinian territories, pending a solution to the conflict, which obviously is there, and we'll see what happens. The United States have put forward plans. We are working with all the permanent 5 members and other members of the quartet to our best of our ability with our history there and on-the-ground experience also as I think we are regarded as an impartial broker that can help find solutions inside the council. We did that last time we were members, but we are not the main actor, obviously, in this regard. We do our best in terms of the financing and to provide the platforms for discussion when that is possible.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you. We have a question which relates to Norway's membership of NATO. Might that bring about any tensions with Russia, or leading on from that, what are Norway's relations with the US and the UK, I suppose, post-Brexit, and France? But how does that all tie together?
No, we have very constructive relations with Russia as well. I spent 5 years there myself as Deputy Chief of Mission. We have good cooperation in the Barents Sea on fishing management, search and rescue, practical issues. Of course, there are overall geopolitical tensions, frictions between Russia and NATO, fluctuating. We relate to that in the same way, whether we are a member of the Security Council or not. But as a member of the Council, our role is to represent the whole membership, all the member states that have voted for us and those that didn't vote for us as well. We don't know who they are, but we are not representing, we are representing ourselves, but of course, but we are not representing NATO. We are an ally of the United States and the UK. That continues to be a fact and very important for our security policy. Same with France and all the other NATO countries. But I think it gives us extra credibility to have that experience of working together with all of them, but also to try to build bridges across so we find consensus, because without consensus, the Council cannot find common ground to decide and make resolutions.
Absolutely. Are there, just, you'd mentioned, I think, the Oslo Accords. Are there any lessons from the negotiations of the Oslo Accords which could be used in attempting peace building in current conflict situations?
Yes, that's a good question, and we believe so. Our ambassador, permanent representative in New York now, was actually, she and her husband was the main actors in the back channel before the Oslo Agreement took place in 1993. And it was a discreet channel. It was based around trade union contacts and providing venues, secret venues often, for discreet talks between Israeli and Palestinian negotiators. There is a Broadway play called Oslo that has been very successful in New York until the Corona crisis struck. It's very interesting because you see how you can create an atmosphere of friendly discussion, informal dialogue, but also to establish yourself as an impartial broker, one that listens and is ready to listen to both sides or all sides in a conflict. And we use that model very well, I think, also with Cuba in the Colombian peace process, which led to the peace agreement in 2016 between the FARC guerrillas and the Colombian government, where the President Santos came to Oslo in October and received the deserved Peace Prize, Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts to establish peace. And the Security Council has had an important role in the Colombian peace process since then, even though there are challenges, of course, in every peace process. There's never, it's seldom a final solution, but to be able to stop conflict, stop bloodshed, lay down the weapons, demobilize, you need to have people who are willing to step up and bring parties together, often discreetly in secret settings.
We have a question from a fellow Norwegian in Australia who's very proud to see his country stepping up and having an influence in the world. So with more countries focusing a lot on domestic issues because of COVID, what can we as individuals and civil society do to promote a more global mindset? I mean, you'd mentioned working with different civil organizations. What more could we be doing from here?
Well, that's a very good and difficult question. But as I said earlier, we have been working since we were last member and before to bring in civil society into the UN discussions. I mean, one thing is the Security Council, it's a bit special, but I was also the coordinator for the Sustainable Development Goals back a few years ago, and we brought in very strongly civil society as a partner and also to present our reports to the United Nations. I think that civil society and NGOs and citizens should and can continue or step up even their support for the multilateral system and support the government and the foreign minister in her efforts to build a strong basis for the rules-based order and a strong consensus domestically to stand up for multilateralism and international law, which your government has been doing and which we are doing as well as like-minded countries, and to support those type of policies and politicians that really believe in international cooperation and stand up for that, because we, as I wouldn't say we are small or medium, we are not so big, we are not big states. There are some big states and there are very many not big states, and we are among the not big ones, but we are significant and we can have an influence as countries with a footprint and credibility to support law of the sea, international law on human rights, and common cooperation on health, as well as other international issues. You cannot solve these problems. We see that with the pandemic. You cannot solve it alone. I mean, everyone will realize it or are realizing it. It's just now it's a question, how do you manage to bring people together? And I'm happy to say that at least more recently, in the last few weeks, the Security Council has stepped up its activity after being a little bit absent in the first few weeks of the corona crisis. Now decisions are being taken on COVID, the ceasefire, which was taken last week, on access to Syrian. You know, there are things happening and moving now in the Security Council under the German presidency at the moment.
Excellent. Well, leading on a little bit from that, there's obviously potentially a divide between the permanent 5 and the non-permanent members, or they can have their slightly be set in their ways, the permanent 5. Can the non-permanent members more easily find common ground amongst each other and lobby through that way?
Oh, that's also a very good question, and it depends really on the issue. I mean, in a way, the splits are more between or among the P5 themselves than it is between the P5 and the rest. But there are certain aspects where the P5 stick together in terms of, you know, having the veto, having the memory, the institutional memory and capacity to hold the pen on different resolutions. And I know that sometimes there are some frustration among the elected 10 members that it's not so easy to grab the pen from the permanent 5 and to start writing resolutions, even though you can do it, but it's not easy if they are not in favor. But I think that we have seen many examples of the elected 10 members coming together, and well, many examples. There are regular meetings among the elected 10 members. Sweden did that. We intend to do the same, to try to find common ground. And if there are splits among the P5, or if the P5 has a common position that the elected members should not agree with, I think that's more rare. But then the elected members can come up and with a common front and push for movement, because after all, you need 9 votes to get anything through. 9 votes and no, let's say, against votes from the permanent 5. So the 10 together can be and are an influence in certain cases. In other cases, the elected 10 members are as split or more split than the permanent 5, because there are many different interests and countries among the elected members as well. So yeah, it's complicated. Depends from case to case.
Just a basic question in terms of boots on the ground to achieve all this. How much bigger is your mission going to have to become to fulfill this role?
Yeah, we are going. I'm not sure exactly about the number. We were talking about having 8 extra people, which is like a 50% increase. To deal with all these issues. We already strengthened the mission with a few people to deal with the campaign, to do the campaign from New York. So there will be more people there. Last time we had the strengthening as well, not as much, but we talked to New Zealand and Sweden in the meantime. And things have changed in 20 years. There's even more work now, it seems, than it was, even though I cannot actually believe it, because we worked 12, 14-hour days also 20 years ago, but it seems to be even more now. So yes, we are increasing our staff significantly to deal with the workload.
Yeah, well, I guess that's to be expected. Just could you expand a little bit more on the role that Norway will play on the women, peace and security agenda?
Well, as I said, there are pressures sometimes against what has been achieved, and we want to be very concrete and very pragmatic and practical, and base ourselves on what has been achieved in text and mandates so far, and make sure that nobody tries to remove references that are important and have been built over the years to the need for women, peace and women's rights, participation and protection to be included. But of course, there is more that can be done in terms of and we will try to do that, bring in female peacemakers, for example, from different conflicts to speak to the council, whether it's in informal format of the so-called AIIA formula, or in more formal settings, to share with the council members their experiences, and also to get more women into the peacekeeping operation. We had the first ever woman, Norwegian lady, who was leading the Cyprus peacekeeping operation a few years ago. That was a big milestone. And to have more financing also for women advisors attached to the United Nations peacekeeping and political operations around the world. Very, very important. And of course, the related agendas of sexual violence, that is very sensitive, very sad, and but very important to pursue as well.
I'm just following a little from that. I'm just going to paraphrase this question a bit, but it's relating to a 2017 UN Security Council ruling on rules of war, not bombing civilians or hospitals or clinics or targeting of journalists. That still seems to be happening. Is there anything Norway can do as part of this to uphold that 2017 ruling on rules of war?
Well, I'm not familiar with the detail, but it sounds very much like very relevant to our protection of civilians agenda and the safe schools agenda, to make sure that we don't backslide or backtrack from what has been decided. Problem is usually not state, well, it can be state actors as well, but it's often non-state actors, and it's hard to get control and to stop such violations of international law. But this is obviously, I have to look more closely at that particular resolution, but it's very relevant to our overall work for protection of civilians and the human rights and the international humanitarian law within the work of the Council.
I mean, it's obviously a very full agenda, but there's a question, are there any other matters or items which you think should be added to the ambit of the Security Council?
Well, the prevention of conflict is obviously an issue which is already there, but it's challenging because sometimes some of the members feel that prevention can encroach on sovereignty issues. But the Secretary General Guterres has put prevention of conflict very high on his agenda, and we are very supportive of that. And it demands a lot from the special representatives of the United Nations Secretary General and envoys and others who and peacekeepers who are in the field and who observe. And it also relates to sustainable development and humanitarian crisis, because very often, including climate related disasters, if you see things happening that you believe can lead to conflict, to bring it to the attention of the Council as early as possible before it results in violence. Very important, but demanding area. That's one area where I'm sure we will be involved as well, but we know it's challenging. And other areas that are not on the Council's agenda, well, we know how difficult it is sometimes to bring conflicts onto the agenda if it relates to sovereignty issues. But the agenda is quite full. I mean, if you look at the agenda, it's a very, very significant agenda, and I can recommend for anyone interested in going deep into the weeds, the Security Council report.org, which we and Australia and other countries are financing, and which gives a great overview of all matters related to the Security Council.
That's a good tip. We'll include that when we send out the follow-up to that. But another just a question, I suppose, related to COVID, Paul, is do you see COVID is changing the way the Security Council operates? I mean, I don't know, in terms of even social distancing in that chamber, but is it still sort of business as usual, as far as you know, from the Security Council perspective?
No, they have not met physically since March. They are doing all meetings virtually, and there are, of course, been some challenges with technicalities and also procedures for voting, but they have sorted it out, and now it seems to work pretty well as we do here on this call with the Zoom. But of course, we as diplomats miss the physical contact and the face-to-face meetings and the informal talks in the corridors, and that can smooth over and so resolve issues. It's not ideal, but it's working, and the Council has found ways, and there are no plans as of yet to go back to the old format. And I understand from colleagues that maybe even or the General Assembly this year, the opening will also be conducted virtually, which will be the first time ever, I think.
That's a true sign of the times. There's a question that evidence suggests that it can take at least half of the 2-year term for states to become effective in this role. I mean, is there any move you think to lengthening the tenure of the non-permanent members? I guess there's a lot of competition to get there even for the 2 years, but is any talk of expanding that out to make it more productive?
Yes and no. First of all, the 2-year term is fixed. I mean, there will be no change to that as far as we can see. We've been discussing reform of the Security Council now for 25 years. I took part in what is called the Open-Ended Working Group, started in 1994 when I came there the first time. And it's still going on. And now it's informally renamed the Never-Ending Working Group, so on Security Council reform. So the expansion of the Council, any change to the terms, have some kind of double terms, they're still stuck there. Even though we support the efforts, it's very hard to move. But what has happened is that when last time we were elected in the year 2000, we were elected together with Ireland, and Italy was the one to draw the last short straw that time. But then the election took place in October, so we only had a couple of months to prepare. This time, or since 2016, they have moved the election to June, which gives the elected member more time, 4 more months to prepare. And as of 1st of October, we and Ireland and others, India, the others that were elected, Kenya together with us, will be sitting in as observers in the Council in October, November, December, which gives us more time to prepare, and that's very useful. And so I'm sure that we'll hit the ground running. We'll be president very soon as we start, and that it will not take us more than a month or even less to be up and running. We have a great team, big team there, but I can see that it can be difficult for countries with smaller capacity. Yes.
Another good question is how will this change your own role here in the region? Well,
what I've been doing since I came here 2 years ago is to establish excellent relations, of course, with DFAT here and in Wellington, but also with the Pacific Island states. And I meet very often with my colleagues here in Canberra, which is, I think, the most important diplomatic center for almost all of the Pacific Island states, next to New York and possibly, no, actually there are no more important centers. It's Canberra and New York are the most important for those countries. So to be here, very privileged to be able to listen and learn from Pacific Island colleagues about their security concerns in the Indo-Pacific, Western Pacific. A very important part of my work will be to bring those concerns to New York and to remind our colleagues there that yes, Africa constitutes the bulk of conflicts, but there are important issues in this part of the world, not least related to climate change and oceans and other activities, illegal activities, fishing, etc., in smuggling. I had a meeting with all of them the other day, all of the colleagues, and we talked about criminal activities as also issues of security concerns. So there are, that's from this vantage point, very interesting part of the overall effort, because all embassies will have to be involved in inputting to the work in New York, so that our colleagues there are fully up to speed on every issue that may come up.
Excellent, thank you very much. Well, I think this is we've got a few questions still coming, but we've covered most of the issues I think that are raising up. Other than, you know, do you think there's going to be increasing stalemate in the Security Council if some of the great powers can't see past their current leaders, put it that way, to cooperate more?
Well, I think there has been stalemates already for quite some time on certain issues. Not all issues. There are, as I said, counterterrorism, other important issues. They find ways together, women, peace and security. But there are certain conflict areas which obviously are not easy to resolve. But we did have a resolution on Syria just a few days ago, and humanitarian access. It was difficult. There are serious differences of national interest involved. So it's a lot of responsibility upon also the elected members to try to help to find the common ground. We have seen blockages in the council before. During the Cold War, there almost nothing happened, you know. So in a way, the period from the end of the Cold War, when I was there mid the 90s the first time, and then later during 2001, 2002, was a period of unprecedented hectic activity and agreement among the permanent five. And then, of course, we are now a little bit more, not as Cold War, but back to more disagreements. But so the 90s was the unusual period, but I think, you know, there is always scope, and the permanent five are responsible players that need to show the world that they deserve to be the permanent members and to take responsibility and uphold the credibility of the council, whether it's by taking decisions or by not taking decisions. So I'm optimistic that what we have seen more recently, after the first bout of Corona crisis paralysis, bodes well for moving forward on most council issues. And after all, resolutions are adopted all the time. We don't hear so much about it. The peacekeeping operations, tens of thousands of peacekeepers keep the peace in the conflicts all over Africa in particular, but also elsewhere. So it's not all doom and gloom.
Well, Paul, that brings us, I think, very neatly to the end of our allotted hour. Thank you so much for sharing your views. I mean, it's fascinating to get your insights, given that you were there 20 years ago the last time. Very wide-ranging. Thank you to the audience for some really good questions. And just, well, we're so pleased you were able to join us. So you diplomats are not the only ones missing the face-to-face conviviality. I wish we could get together and toast it. But from our side, thank you very much. Congratulations again on the campaign. We wish Norway all the best in that role. We wish you all the best in your role here. And to everyone else, thank you very much for your time and and stay safe and well, and we'll see you again on our next webinar. Paul, thank you again very much, and see you in person.
Thank you, Alistair, and thanks to everyone who listened and asked the good questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.